Pravit Moy Druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm a professor who tries to help you by providing context to what's going on in the war in Ukraine. So, I'm doing a reaction video to Vlad Vexler, and I want you to understand I'm not fighting with him. I'm actually trying to amplify certain points. I'm a big fan of Vlad's. I think he does a great job, and he put this up, Kremlin strategy for Trump in 2024. I thought so much of it that I went to my community and I said, in my estimation, this is Vlad Vexler's most important video, and I urge you to watch it to the end. So I want you to listen, and I hope that I can amplify some of his ideas. So here we go.
Hello, beautiful community. Today we're talking about the Kremlin's evil plans around Trump 2024. And it's an important conversation because we want to admit realities about Russian interference in our democracies, but we also don't want to freak out about it and completely lose our sense of perspective. And all of that is made all the more significant by Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine, about which each of you knows so much really on a daily basis.
Okay, so I'm going to stop for a second. So he's going to try to thread a needle between don't do this and don't do that, and just pay attention, because I think this is a very important conversation to have. Now I'm going to skip forward a little bit because he's going to talk about something else and then start again.
Let's go to about 2016 when the Russians kind of backed Trump. So is this true? And if so, what difference did it make, and why did they back Trump? Well, in 2016, they didn't think Trump could win, so they weren't backing Trump as a potential president. They were backing Trump as a disrupting figure who would make life for Hillary more difficult and would make Hillary's presidency more toxic.
Now, that is an important point. And if you're an American liberal, you would probably have the sense that, no, they were backing Trump. He was a Manchurian candidate. He was in Putin's pocket or whatever. And that's not my understanding either. I'm agreeing with Vlad that I think there's a different picture. There's a great book called Putin's Playbook. It's on Kindle. It's $12.79. It's well worth reading, by Rebecca Koffler. She's of some kind of former Soviet Union descent, just like Vlad. And the point that she makes is that the Russians were not trying to elect Trump. They were trying to sow discord, and whether it was sowing discord for Hillary or Trump, and they thought probably Hillary was going to win, which is why they're making life hard with Trump. But they're just trying to sow discord. They don't really care who it is that's going to win. They are just trying to make it miserable. And so I think Vlad is right. I think Rebecca's right. I think that's what actually happened. And again, it's a hard thing if you're an American liberal, because you've heard this narrative in the mainstream media with the Trump, the probe and all that other kind of stuff, the Mueller report and all these other kind of things. I don't think that's what's happening. I think it was a disinformation campaign that was really trying to just make things miserable for whoever.
They bought into the political establishment in the United States prejudice that Trump couldn't win.
And that's true. The establishment powers, the people that are in the political class, never thought this was going to happen.
But the logic was, look, all governments are implicated, this is the 2014 story, implicated in the sanctions regime against Russia, the milder sanctions that were in place then. These countries are going to be victims of our interference, the Kremlin thought, and our interference is going to be about undermining their democracies, about creating conflict and toxicity.
And they were doing that. They were doing it on social media. And I talked to a professor who studies the Russian troll farms, and yes, that's exactly what they're trying to do, is just so it's almost like trying to sow weeds into the political discourse, if that analogy makes sense.
So this is not about the Russians having a horse in the race that they're loyal to.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather about the Russians trying to cause the biggest possible mess.
That's exactly right.
And they did that via the social media campaigns, via the hacking and leaking. But on the whole, the American center and the center left overestimated the significance of the Russian interference in a very, very dangerous way. So there are people who deny it's real. It's as real as anything. So forget about that being a debate. But the question is, what impact did it have? And this is actually a more important question than you might allow. Because you might think, well, okay, they made a 1% difference versus a 2% difference. Well, who cares? They interfered, they made some kind of a difference, and there we go. But no. There's actually a really serious danger there. And danger is what I call externalization of domestic pathologies. It is about us saying, you know, all these things that are wrong with our democracies, they are largely products of malign foreign interference, the Russians getting into our democracies and making a mess. And if only we get rid of that influence, our democracies will restabilize into a normal orbit. So this is an absolutely out of control crisis that is happening in our democracies. Our unbelievable incapacity to look at the domestic causes of various kinds of political deformation.
Right. Even if you wiped out all of the Russian influence, it wouldn't have changed. I mean, like the underlying issues that have brought us there, the frustration on both left and right in the American political spectrum would still exist. What the Russians did was simply play on it and amplify it. And the Russians, the way that they function, again, going back to Koffler's book, the way that they function was they'd be happy to, with their trolls, amp up what happened Charlottesville, the white supremacist stuff in Charlottesville, but they'll also be happy to amplify the very worst malign elements of Black Lives Matter or whatever social justice, racial, getting people to be at each other. That's what they're about. And they don't care if it's serving the left or the right, as long as it's sowing discord, making America weaker. And so that's very important. But if you just get rid of the Russian element, it doesn't all magically go away. We still have our own issues that we need to be dealing with. And so we need to face that squarely.
Much the same is true here in East Sussex on the coast. Much the same thing is true in Britain. In other words, there is an extraordinary incapacity that Remainers, I'm a Remainer, people like me, show when it comes to understanding where the 2016 Brexit vote came from, what social forces it was an expression of. And you get this extraordinary situation as a result where philosophy professors on Twitter think that Brexit is caused by a combination of one, irrationality by voters, and two, malign foreign manipulation of Britain's democracy. And if you get rid of irrationality and malign interference, Brexit's a non-issue, it can't happen.
In America, it would be Trump wouldn't have happened if you just got rid of that. But that's short-sighted, and that's not going to serve us well. You got to get to the actual forces that were driving why Trump appealed to his voters and that kind of thing. And it's more than just, well, they're racist or, the Russians are interfering. It's more than that.
And that is absolutely terrifying. It's terrifying because it means that people who think that they know what the sources of our problems are in fact people who are completely flying blind, people who are going to be completely unalert to that absolutely vital moment that's going to come in many democracies, whereby you have to judge, is this the time where we have to stand up because it's our last chance to preserve counter-majoritarian institutions, our last chance to preserve checks and balances and so on. So there's an extraordinary depoliticizing effect that this business of thinking, it's foreign interference plus irrationality has. When we fall for that, we actually become as a phrase I used the other day on the main channel, psychological siblings of that depoliticized blob in the middle in Russia. Right? And we don't.
Isn't that amazing? Like the people in Russia that couldn't rise up if they wanted to oppose Putin because they just have been so beat down by, well, what does it matter anyway? I can't actually do anything. I mean, I'm not going to interfere. I'm not going to say anything, or I'm not going to be involved. Like, that's not what we want in our democracy.
Don't want to do that. We don't want our democracies to be drifting away from us while we're in denial about where we are and where things are moving. Rant over, back to Russia and Trump. Now, having been shocked by Trump's election, having initially celebrated it, the Russians became enormously disappointed with him. And they felt that two things went wrong. One, they could kind of predict, and the other they felt they couldn't predict. The one they could predict is that American institutions kept Trump in check and to a good extent co-opted him.
Now, I could have predicted that. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the American Founding Fathers and their understanding of leadership as they created the structure. And they created the structure in such a way that no one individual could destroy it, right? You've divided powers, you have executive, legislative, and judicial, and then you have federal, state, local, and you've divided it so many ways with checks and balances that even if you put somebody in a Hitlerian kind of figure, he doesn't have the ability to destroy it. Whereas Hitler actually wiped out the equivalent of half our Bill of Rights in the Enabling Act. So they could, I mean, it went very fast. Now, we complain about gridlock in the United States all the time. Oh, these politicians aren't getting anything done. That's by design. They create it in such a way where it's hard to get things done, but it's also hard to destroy the system. So, thank you, Founding Fathers.
But then what also happened is that Trump, while being a communicator of genius, showed an unbelievable incapacity to form an elite around him and actually get things done, and actually in a significant way begin to break down America's democratic institutions. They thought he'd be able to do that more, but a combination of neurodiversity and extreme narcissism and some other factors made Trump completely inept at this. So
and part of this is that Trump, as a narcissist, is always about Trump. As much as he talks about tearing down the establishment, it was more rhetoric than actually being able to accomplish doing that kind of thing. And so I think he's spot on with that. And as a narcissist, he's not able to have anybody outshine him or help him to the degree that, and he's overshadowed by anyone getting these kind of jobs done.
He's the opposite of a kind of Viktor Orban, or Putin indeed, who would be able to come in and very slowly, in a disciplined way, begin to form alliances and begin to tilt the situation in the direction in which they'd like it to go.
So let me also speak to that. He's a leader. He's a charismatic leader, and you might not like him, but he holds a lot of sway in charisma, individual leadership. But he's not an organizational builder in the sense, like, I don't mean not the Trump organization, but I mean he's not creating institutions made in his image, in which that's going to outlast him and change the overall directory of the government. And I think that's a fair analysis.
So they were very disappointed with Trump. What they think now, however, is that while Trump is probably still incapable of forming an elite around him, he is going to learn, he looks willing about learning some lessons from his first term to get less co-opted by the, institutional establishment, if you like, and to be able to attack it and toxicify it more efficaciously than he did the first time around. So I think he'll do better with that, but not quite.
Let me make it like this. He can't tear the system down, but he can still be a bull in the china shop. And from that perspective, I think that's also very fair to as a analogy.
As well as they might have originally hoped before they found out what Trump's like when he's in office. Now, they know that Trump isn't a fan of Zelensky and that Trump is not a fan of a Ukrainian victory. but they also realize that um, complex democratic bureaucracies are difficult to turn around, and they are aware that Trump's not going to be able to come in and sort of press a magic button. But they feel that Trump will be a very important post
Okay, let me pause there for a second.
along the way.
So Trump is a fan of Trump, and his whole shtick is I can make a deal with whoever. It's all personal, charismatic leadership rather than working through the institution. Like that's not his strength. Is the institutions. It's all about that personal deal making, and so he will continue to make the argument. And just watch in the future, he'll continue to make the argument. I can make a deal with Putin. I can make this happen. I can whatever. So even if he was saying that he could make a deal with Putin that would give Ukraine back all of its territory, he would still, and he's not saying that, but he would still frame it in, I can make that personal deal because that's who I am. That's the core of understanding Trump.
To the Kremlin cultivating for itself an opportunity to have a frozen conflict, which is then followed by, as it were, a lifting of the clouds, so that the Kremlin can then have a second go at Kiev, or maybe even try to provoke a weakened NATO by
And at this point, I think that's what Putin is hoping for, is to be able to freeze the conflict, at least temporarily, maybe for a while, but to freeze the conflict so that they can lick their wounds, rebuild, and come back another time.
Challenging Article 5 in 2028, let's say. What's very important to understand here is that the legitimately real forces of democratic decline in the West are misunderstood and overestimated in the Kremlin. They don't understand how much the process of democratic decline in the West, while real, is also contingent, can be partially reversed, and takes very different forms in different countries. So what we are legitimately worried, and indeed we're going to talk about this a lot more, about connection with our democracies, the Kremlin sees in this sort of simplified ideological dogmatic way. So the Kremlin thinks that the rapid decline of Western democracies is inevitable and that it's going to be rapid too. That's on the whole a mistake.
That's not going to happen.
But that is the kind of dogma with which they're approaching the prospect of a 2024 Trump win. And this time they're more realistic and they think that it's a coin toss between Trump and Biden. And obviously they don't want Biden to win. They want Trump to win. But here's a very important follow-up.
Before he gets to that follow-up, I'm going to say this. We're a year and a half out from the election. A lot of things can happen. That's a huge span of time for a political election. A year and a half out, Trump was the 7th place candidate, and we were thinking maybe Jeb Bush is going to be president. So a lot can happen. So don't worry about Trump. You start to worry about Trump after, if he starts to win after Super Tuesday, right? If he wins New Hampshire or Iowa and then New Hampshire and then South Carolina, these are the primary states. If he starts to collect all those states, start to worry. But I don't know that that's going to work. He's a wounded politician at this point, and we don't know what's going to happen.
I'm not an American citizen, but if I were an American citizen, I would take very seriously the idea that you've got to approach Trump voters with dignity and recognize that you share a table of politics with them. And only that will allow the United States to move toward rescuing or reconsolidating some sense of a shared citizen belonging. Without
now, let me also add there, I'm a conservative who's all in for Ukraine. And the reason that I am is because I asked myself, what would Ronald Reagan do? And then I went down that path mentally and said, well, this is the path. This is the way to, there's clearly the bad guys. There's clearly the victims. And it made total sense to me. Now, nothing good comes of just saying, well, these Trump, and people in my forums also will bash Trump regularly to the point where it's like, really, do you care about Ukraine more than you care about bashing Trump? Let's all work together on those things that we can, where we can work together to support Ukraine and get where we're trying to go. So I say that to say this: bashing Trump supporters, or even bashing Trump, but bashing their supporters will not get you anywhere. Let's work together to try to get, like, here's the thing: if you're on the political left in America, your whole goal right now should be to get a Republican candidate. If you're supporting Ukraine, a Republican candidate who is supporting Ukraine. So either way, you get somebody who's supporting Ukraine. Now, you can vote against them in the general election. That's fine, perfectly fine. I'm going to vote for the Republican, hopefully, that is supporting Ukraine, while you vote for the Democrat that's supporting Ukraine. We're okay with that. But that's what you want to be doing. And this fighting in between us, it's been very toxic over the last few years. And doing that is just, it's not helping anyone.
Out which no democracy can last for a very long time. And that's the crisis we're facing in the West, that we're relying on the strength of our institutions at the moment to protect our democracy
and it
from
is.
deleterious and toxic politicians, and from the sort of seemingly inevitable divisiveness and polarization out there in society.
Now that's an important point, and let me amplify that. Our institutions are the thing standing between us and ourselves, of us destroying ourselves. Our institution, the strength of our institutions is restraining us from just tearing each other apart, and that's all that is there. And we have to restore that fabric of where we're going to be civil with each other in the meantime. And we're not there yet, but we need to be crossing the aisle more and working with each other in order to achieve mutual objectives.
All of that the Russians want to exploit. They want to mobilize.
Exactly right.
But the reason I'm speaking about it so much from our perspective is that we can't lose sight of the fact that what the Russians are trying to do is exaggerate and dramatize problems we already have.
Exactly.
And problems which are nothing to do with Russia, and which need to be understood and thought about in local terms. So I'm grateful for your time. We'll speak again probably tomorrow. Much love and talk soon.
Okay, so that's Vlad's take on this. I think it was awesome. If you're not familiar with Vlad Vexler, look up Vlad Vexler chat. Highly recommend. Please go there and subscribe. I've learned volumes from this guy, and I can't say enough good things about him. We don't agree about exactly everything, but I agree with a lot of what he has to say. We're both 100% behind Ukraine. All right, thank you for your time. Thank you for caring about Ukraine.